Welcome. I'm Gail Rubin, the doyen of death, and very pleased to have a guest interview today with Gary Newman, CLU. That means Chartered Life Underwriter.
Hi, everybody.
I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Gary's in South Carolina, not far from Myrtle Beach. And I've known Gary for a number of years because of a number of columns that he used to write in the local newspaper there in South Carolina. Tell me a little about that, Gary.
I had a long career as a life insurance professional, okay? And it metamorphosed into some estate planning assistance, state administration, elder living techniques, financial planning, and even psychology of living, okay? And when I retired, I had all this knowledge, I thought, bouncing around in my head and just what to do with it. So my wife's name is Gail too. We retired. We went on the road in a motorhome for 7 years. We were homeless with six wheels, and in Walmart parking lots and state parks and campgrounds, I began to sit down and write it all down. So it produced a couple of mini books. Okay, and then we decided to settle here, grow up and act our age, and settle down here. So I went to the local newspaper and say, hey, I said, hey, here's these books. Would you like to serialize these into a column? And surprisingly, and it really was a surprise, they did. So it succeeded into what amounted to a second career, 82 segments in this column, okay, which is how you met me and I met you. Yeah, okay. That itself metamorphosed into teaching through Ollie. You have an Ollie where you are and you're active in it, okay.
That's the
And that's
Osher
how I met Brenda.
Lifelong
I'm sorry, what?
Osher. Ali means Osher Lifelong Learning
Yeah,
Institute.
right. For the local university here, yes.
So you've been offering this information and helping people learn about planning ahead for end of life issues. And you
Yeah,
yourself, you're 88 now,
yeah,
and you recently did a column that I ran on my blog, the
yes,
Family Plot blog at goodgoodbye.com,
yes,
saying
yes.
that you've unplanned your plans for funerals.
Right.
What did you do and why did you do this?
How many hours do we have to answer that question? Yeah. I kind of realized that uh, let's call it my 10 years ago, decade ago clairvoyance about planning sort of deteriorated and it no longer is appropriate. And despite my rigidity being, oh, as we grow older, we get more rigid. We kind of hang on to our our comfort zone, things not liking change, although changes sometimes seem very appropriate. So I decided to open up my mind and really holler at myself. So first of all, and number one, uh, I'm 88. I have outlived almost everyone who would ever be interested in my funeral. Okay. Uh, Number two, we have an influence now that makes gatherings highly undesirable, especially for old folks like us and my family. Okay, the pandemic. Okay. Um, Number three, being highly respectful of my heritage, as most of us are at this age, okay? But myself being rather unobservant, okay? Um, but I'm also discovering that today's seems to me, and this is arguable, younger generation, our children, our grandchildren, many aren't as concerned about tradition. And in my case, that that holds true. Okay, so why have this big deal all planned out with all the bells and whistles, all the rituals, all the procedures, the the big chapel service and the sermon and the convoy of limousines and all of that, um, and all the little ritual things from biblical precepts. Okay, when it, it really, no one really, hardly anyone really cares. Okay, so why do it? All right, so therefore, and uh, furthermore, I realized that, and this is from dealing with many, many families, there are people in families that don't like each other, and to and to force them to be together because they would feel very guilty if they didn't come to a funeral, they have to be together. So why be almost cruel to them by imposing this on them? So all that. Uh, Plus the fact that my Gail doesn't take a whole lot of interest in the traditional things anyway. So okay, so why make it happen the way I thought it would 10 years ago? So my clairvoyance decided, hey Gary, it's I'm not that interested anymore, and I won't feel guilty if we don't do it. Okay, so
So
okay,
here's
yeah,
the situation for our viewers who might not know what you did. So
yeah,
10 years ago, you pre-planned your funeral and you
and
prepaid
prepaid. Yeah. Uh-huh.
to have a funeral home
Yes.
do all of these bells and whistles that you're talking about.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And then now in 2020, 10 years later, you
Yes.
unplanned it. You basically went back to the funeral home where you pre-planned and
Yes.
asked for your money
Yes.
back. And your
Yes.
money was in a trust fund, I believe, to
Yes. Yeah,
okay. But are
money.
you still planning on being buried in the DC area?
The funeral home was the local one of us, privately owned one, not one of the major conglomerate owned ones. Uh, um, um, and they were very gracious about refunding. Of course, the law requires anyway.
Yeah.
So, and it, it was in the District of Columbia where the law requires prepaid uh, funds have to be escrowed in a financial institution. Okay. And it was for 10 years in CDs. Okay. It earned, big deal, on the average of 1.45% per year compound interest. Okay. And by the way, if we're still there, it would be only 0.001%, 1/100th of 1%. Um, and they were gracious too. They refunded. Okay, so I put it into my investment account. It's doing better than that. All right. Uh, Changes in the estate plan directives. Instead of all this pre-planned uh, uh, um, uh, um, uh, um, detail, just wherever I die and whenever I die, just put me in the ground in the plot that we own in the cemetery in the Washington area. Yes, that stays. Okay, okay. Just put me there. All right, in plain pine box and so on. All right, and then family, whatever you want to do to suit your feelings and your heart and your desires, do it, and my estate will pay for that. Okay. Chances are they will have gatherings, they will have at-home things or whatever. Okay. They might even decide to have an unveiling of the marker when it finally gets placed there. Okay. So okay, we'll pay for that. It'll be a whole lot less than the whole bells and whistles thing. Okay. So that's what it's going to be instead. So everybody will be more or less happy, and the kids will wind up inheriting more.
If your plans are now left up to the kids, basically,
Yeah,
are they
beyond just put me in the ground. Yes.
just put
Hmm.
me in the ground in a plain pine box?
Yeah, all the observances are up to them. Yeah, and
Okay.
again, yeah,
Well, and the is your grave prepaid for?
that is, and we didn't change that. Hmm.
Okay.
Even
Um,
the memorial plaque and the inscriptions thereon. Yeah,
okay, so you pre-plan the
that
opening,
remains. Good
closing,
point.
and
Yes, that remains. Yeah.
yeah, because
Hmm.
a lot of people don't necessarily know that the cemetery arrangements are usually separate and in addition to the funeral arrangements.
The other day, I realized maybe I should have known this before. You don't have to buy the memorial monument through the cemetery company. You can buy it directly from the monument company, and they claim that it will cost you less. Maybe you know something about that. I don't.
Yes, well, very often the cemeteries will have their own monument shops
Yeah.
associated with the cemetery, but yeah, just like buying a casket online, there are various monument manufacturers
Uh-huh.
who
Well
can
said.
sell you something online. And, but again, shop before you drop. This is something where there's a wide price differential. And very often people who don't look at this as a consumer issue and shop around will find themselves maybe paying more than they need to.
Thank you. Thank you, professional thanatologist, for that wisdom. Yes.
So what advice would you give? I mean, you're basically going against what I'm telling people to do, which is to pre-plan. And
Yes.
you don't necessarily have to prepay, but I do like what you've done in terms of making the funds available to whoever is going to carry out your wishes.
Yes.
And it's important, I think, for people in families to know who will be in charge of carrying out those wishes. Uh,
Yes. And guidelines.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you had said your rabbi, I guess, is now in Israel. So the one who you wanted to put in charge of
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
services isn't even available. And
Uh,
when we,
Parenthetically, if I died today, they'd have to hire a surrogate rabbi. Yeah.
yeah,
If they wanted to have a funeral service. Yes.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And very often this day and age with the coronavirus pandemic, we're limited. And here we are, we're filming this in mid-November, and the are shooting up across the country, and we're all going back into lockdown where we are here in New Mexico. So
Yeah.
very often funeral homes are in the position that they have to limit the number of people who can actually be there in
Yes.
person,
Yes.
and Zoom services or gravesite streaming of services is being provided by many funeral homes, but not all. So again, that's another element that needs to be researched should one of your family members die during this pandemic.
Well said. Yes. Um, I know I'm the loyal opposition to the the often uh, advocated pro pre-range and pro prepay, with everything taken care of. The family doesn't have to worry about it. You don't incur arguments among the family about what to do with the funeral and all that, and relieving the family of having to advance the money and all of that. So yes, there are, I will concur, some very, very desirable aspects to prepaying and prearranging. Unless you're me, that's all.
So what lessons would you like people to take away from your pre-planning and then unplanning?
Well,
Uh, Still make the money available, certainly.
good question. Yeah, and there's something that I think is worthwhile saying here. Number one, if you're going to unplan and unpay, at least give some sort of testamentary enforceable guidelines. Number one, okay, like I did. All right. Number two, how to pay for it. All right. Now, those of us who are capable of disciplining ourselves to set up an escrow fund in our own investment accounts and safeguard it, and not ever invade it to buy a boat or a new car or whatever. Okay, do that instead of through the escrowed CD at 0.001%. Okay, or here's another idea, and this comes from my long life in the insurance business. Many of us do have a good, wholesome, healthy portfolio of old life insurance. Okay, now the kids are grown, they don't need our money anymore. They're educated. So what to do with all this insurance? Okay. Well, the stockbroker might say, oh, cash surrender it and give us the money to invest. But you know what? This life insurance has very, very valuable options in it that we, unless we have an agent that tells us, we don't know about. One is if it's good, solid cash value life insurance in a major company, some of whom are leading mutual companies, you can stop paying the premiums and it will stay in force because the dividends will cover the premiums. We have one where the dividend is $1,000 a year more than the premium. So we can stay in force and not have to pay for it. Or even if that isn't available, a reduced face amount is available, paid up, no more premiums. The cash value keeps growing. The tax benefits remain. The exemption from probate involvement is there also. So life insurance can be very, very, and a very, very effective, desirable tool for paying for the at death expenses when they are incurred.
If people have questions, can they reach out to you?
I would love to hear. What you mentioned the newspaper column. Uh, at the end of the column, I gave people my email address and said, "Please feedback. Let's have a conversation." And I would absolutely love to do it with this interview also. Email address: Gary Newman, Newman, dot CLU at gmail.com.
Gary, great to talk with you and interesting insights into our funeral planning futures, giving us great food for thought. Thank you for joining me today,
Oh,
Gary.
it's been a joy, Gail, and I'm awfully glad to be together with you in presenting the other viewpoint from some of the things that we see in your presentations. And I hope it's been wholesome and helpful. It certainly has been fun. Thanks. Yes.